Chapter 23 Luck. On Sunday morning, James was in the living room on his PlayStation. Hewitt came in and pushed his feet off the coffee table. "You just gonna sit around doing nothing all day?" he asked. That was plan A, James grinned. He'd missed a lot of sleep over the last couple of weeks. It was nice to bum around indoors for a change. "What about deliveries?" Hewitt asked. "Kelvin called me," James said, reluctantly pausing his game. "The nice lady who calls me with my deliveries has been busted. Not that it matters, because there aren't any customers. Everyone's heard about the arrests, and they're scared that if they ring up for a drug delivery, they'll have PC Plod turning up on their doorstep rather than the likes of me." "Does Kelvin think KMG is ruined?" "He says it'll take at least a month to get new supplies of coke and set up distribution. Other gangs will move in and snatch a lot of the business, but Kelvin thinks KMG has the clout to get back on top of things, provided Keith Moore doesn't get nicked." "What about Junior and April? Have you heard from them?" "I've spoken to both of them. I got invited to lunch, but I can't be asked." Hewitt sounded slightly annoyed. "Why aren't you going?" "What's the point?" James shrugged. "The mission's as good as over. We'll be back at campus in a week or two." "James, the mission carries on either until Keith Moore is caught or we officially get told to come home. You're our closest link to the Moore kids now Nicole is gone. I'd be interested to know what Keith is up to at the moment." James reached forward and switched off the PlayStation, looking thoroughly put out. "Fine," he huffed. "I'll call Junior and re-invite myself." Hewitt left James at the Moore house, then drove on a few hundred metres to drop Kerry at Dinesh's. James thought there might be a bad atmosphere, but when Keith opened the door, he was in swimming shorts with a big grin on his face. The house was huge, and even though they had a cleaner, you could tell 4 kids lived there the second you walked through the door. There were trainers and cushions chucked everywhere, dirty cups and plates. James thought it was cool. He hated when you go around some kid's house and the mother goes hysterical when you put your cup down in the wrong place. "Come in," Keith said, dripping over the floor tiles. "April and Junior are swimming." "I never realised you'd be in the pool." "Don't worry. Go up to Junior's room. He's got about 10 pairs of swimming shorts in his middle drawer." "Cheers," James said. Junior had a massive room with a big screen TV and video, a wardrobe full of decent clothes, and a gumball machine. It wasn't a bad spread for a kid who claimed to be hard done by. James stripped off and came down in a pair of orange shorts with seahorses on. The indoor pool was about 15 metres long, with palms and flower beds along one side. Ringo and Keith were swimming laps. April and Junior were at the far end in a whirlpool tub. James stepped into the steaming water, gave April a kiss, and sat beside her. She looked fit in her swimming costume. Once he was in the tub, James was glad Hewitt had made him get out of the house. The warm jets of water made him feel relaxed, and having April cuddled up close was a bonus. He took his hand off her back when Keith wandered up. "I'm ordering takeaway," Keith said, raising his voice above the bubbling water. "What do you guys want?" "Indian," April said. "Pizza," Junior said. Keith looked at James. "Deadlock. The guest gets the casting vote." James didn't like Indian much, but April had a cute grin on her face, and she started sliding her toes up his leg. "Indian," he said. "Traitor," Junior said, slicing his hand through the water and giving James a soaking. James, Junior and April had a splashing battle, then toweled off and put on robes before the food arrived. Ringo and Keith sat on the sofa, while James, April and Junior arranged themselves on cushions around the coffee table with all the boxes of food on it. Keith found the remote between 2 sofa cushions and switched the TV hanging on the wall to News 24. They all concentrated on stuffing their faces until the TV cut to a policeman. The title up on screen said Superintendent Carlisle, Operation Snort. He started speaking to the camera. "We've made over 150 arrests in the last 3 days and believe we have taken a major step against illegal drugs in this country." A lump of prawn vindaloo smacked Superintendent Carlisle in the forehead and began sliding down the screen. This represents a giant stride forwards in our war against illegal drugs in the UK. Ah, try and catch me, Superintendent, Keith shouted, chucking another prawn. Keith's kids joined in, hurling lumps of curry and handfuls of rice until the screen was a blurry mess. Everyone laughed, but it had a hollow ring, like they were really scared by the arrests. Junior turned around and looked at his dad. "Did you ask James about Miami?" "No," Keith said. "Miami?" James asked. "I usually take the boys to my place in Miami for half term," Keith explained. "But Ringo says he's got a lot of homework and doesn't want to go this year." "He's having a party," April explained. "I expect we'll come home and find this house razed to the ground." "Who says I'm having a party?" Ringo said defensively. "It'll be boring without Ringo," Junior said. "And the plane ticket's paid for, so Dad suggested I take a mate." "Cool," James said, bursting into a grin. "I'll have to check with my parents, but it should be okay. Are you going, April?" "No," April said. "Me and Erin are skiing with our mum." "It's a family tradition," Keith explained. "We all used to go on holiday together, but I'd always be strangling my wife. Junior and April usually end up rolling around the floor if they're together for more than a few hours. And Erin. We think the real Erin was abducted at birth and replaced by an alien from Neptune," Junior explained. "I've been here about 10 times and I've still never met Erin," James said. Keith shook his head and smiled. "That girl may be my daughter, but I haven't got a clue what goes on inside that little head of hers." "You'll love Miami," Junior said. "It's boiling hot and our house is right on the beach. You can crawl out of bed, run down the beach and be in the sea within 30 seconds. "I'll ring Zara up now," James said. "Is Kyle home?" Ringo asked. "Probably," James said. "Did you want a word with him?" Ringo gave his dad a mischievous grin as he spoke. "Just tell Kyle there's a big party going down here, Friday after next." Keith burst out laughing. James thought Keith was a really cool dad, especially considering the stress he was under. "You can have your party," Keith said, "but Calvin and a couple of other guys from the boxing club are going to chaperone it, in case any of your pals decide to start peeing on the carpets or stubbing out ciggies on my Egyptian rug." "What?" Ringo gasped. "I don't want some crew of muscleheads bossing my mates around. I'll be totally embarrassed." "Don't worry," Keith said. "I'll tell them to keep a low profile." James gave Zara a call. She was surprised, but she said it was okay to travel. It was already turning dark when James got home. He recognised John Jones's Toyota on the driveway. He was in the living room with Zara, Hewitt, Kerry and Kyle. "What's this in aid of?" James asked. John Jones explained. "As soon as Zara heard about your little holiday, she contacted me and I rushed over here." "Why is me going on holiday such a big deal?" James asked. "Miami is the centre of the world drug trade," John explained. "It's no coincidence that Keith Moore has a home there. The saying goes, if you want a gram of cocaine, stand on any street corner. If you want a ton of cocaine, stand on any street corner in Miami." There are 20 smaller gangs snapping at the heels of KMG. Keith has to get his hands on fresh supplies of cocaine and get KMG working again. A lot of his top people have been arrested, and he won't know who he can trust. So he'll be brokering the deal himself. "So what can I do?" James asked. "We know KMG has a long-standing relationship with a Peruvian drug cartel called Lambiek," John explained. "To pay Lambiek, Keith will have to transfer millions from his overseas bank accounts. If we can find out what bank and country Keith's money is coming from, we'll have a lead that could help us unravel the whole financial structure of KMG, and maybe even Lambiek as well. Keith can't keep every detail of his business in his head. He'll be going to Miami carrying some piece of information that links him to his money. It might be a bank account number, or the phone number of a bank, or a file on the hard drive of his laptop. Whatever it is, you're going to be in Keith Moore's house for 7 days. You're never going to get a better opportunity to grab information than that." James smiled. "So much for bumming around on the beach all day. As soon as this meeting is over, I'm driving you back to campus for 2 days emergency training," Hewitt said. There's a lot you need to learn, but we don't want you away from the Moore family for more than a few days. What excuse will you use for me not being at school? We'll tell everyone you are planning to visit your aunt and cousin Lauren during half term, but we brought it forward because of your trip to Miami. Chapter 24. Facts. James slept better than he had for ages. His bed in Luton was cramped and had springs that jammed in your back. Plus on campus there was no Kyle squirming in the top bunk, and no 300-seater jets whizzing overhead. The plumbing worked better as well. James put on a Metallica CD and rocked out in his shower without having to worry about getting scolded every time someone touched the tap in the kitchen. When he was clean, he put on CHERUB uniform. The rooms and corridors in the main building reminded James of a hotel. As he waited for the lift down to the dining room, he reflected that the only thing lacking was room service. He loaded up a plate with bacon and hash brown and ate bits with his fingers while one of the staff cooked him a mushroom omelette. Most kids had gone off to first lesson, but Amy was sitting at a table, dipping a finger of toast into a soft-boiled egg. "You're wearing a white t-shirt," James said, taken aback. "You got the white shirt when you retired as a cherub." "My undercover days are over," Amy said. James looked sad. "But I'm 17, James," Amy said. "I took my A-levels in the summer. I'm working here as an assistant dog's body to earn some cash. Then I'm off to see the world before I start university in January." "Where are you going?" "Cairns, in Australia. My big brother lives there." "That's the other side of the world," James said miserably. "I'll probably never see you again." "You've only got to hop on an aeroplane. My brother set up a diving school when he finished university. He took me up to the Great Barrier Reef a couple of weeks ago. It's so beautiful there." "So you're training me up for my Miami trip?" James asked. Amy nodded. "And you better behave. Now that I'm staff, I'm allowed to dish out punishments." "Cool," James grinned. "Who have you nailed?" "Only one kid," Amy said. "I was covering for one of the judo instructors. This horrible little red shirt boy kept giving me lip. He got a week cleaning up the changing room near the cross-country trail." "Oh, it always gets really muddy in there," James smiled. "How old was this kid?" 8, Amy said. "He started bawling his eyes out, but I didn't back down. After that, all I got from the other kids in the class was, 'Yes, miss,' 'No, miss,' 'Of course, miss.'" "So what have I got?" James asked. Amy slid a heap of books across the table. They were all weighty. One was called The Ultimate Hacker's Reference and was over 10 centimetres thick. "It's going to be a busy couple of days," Amy said. "I'll try and get you through techniques for hacking Keith's computer by this afternoon. Then we'll make a start on international banking." "What's that in aid of?" James asked. "Suppose Keith was on the telephone and he mentioned a Euro CD and an order party. Unless you know about banking, you wouldn't be able to tell whether Keith is on the phone to a Russian money laundering syndicate or organising a disco." "Sounds like this is going to be a real riot," James said, flipping through one of the giant books as he tucked in a forkload of bacon. Amy ignored him. "MI5 are preparing a dossier on the Lambiek cartel. They'll email it here, and we'll work on that tomorrow morning. Tomorrow afternoon, we'll finish up by testing out your hacking skills on real computers." James and Amy studied into the evening. You normally got at least 2 weeks on the background material for a mission, but everything had to be crammed into a couple of days. When it got to 8 o'clock, Amy finally let him off. "I feel like a swim," she said. "Coming?" CHERUB had 4 pools. The learner's pool was the smallest and least attractive, but Amy had taught James to swim there the year before, and they both wanted to go back for old time's sake. There was nobody else around. Most kids preferred using the main pool, which had diving boards and water slides. They had a 10-lap race. James kept up with Amy until they made the last turn, when she blasted off into the distance. They got out and sat on the edge. James felt like his lungs were about to burst. "You're getting stronger," Amy grinned, not even short of breath. "You might be able to give me a real race when you grow a bit bigger and shed the puppy fat." James's heart sank when he realised Amy had been toying with him. "I'll definitely come and visit you in Australia when I'm older," he said, circling his big toe through the water. "If that's all right." Amy smiled. "Of course it's all right. My brother has mates from his CHERUB days turning up all the time." "It's weird," James said. "I never even think about the kids I knew before I came to CHERUB, but I feel really close to the kids I know here." "It's a defined psychological phenomenon," Amy said. James looked mystified. "You what?" "All humans have a basic need to share their lives with someone," Amy explained. "Children with their parents, adults with their wives, husbands, or whoever. Because the kids at CHERUB have no parents, they make very strong bonds with each other. There's a big reunion on campus every couple of years. You'd be amazed how many CHERUBs end up marrying each other." "Sometimes it really gets on my nerves how smart-assed everyone at CHERUB is," James grinned. "I mean, how come you know stuff like that?" "I'm doing psychology at university," Amy said. "They gave us a list of books to read before the course starts. Besides, James, you're not exactly dumb yourself. CHERUB wouldn't even sniff at a kid who wasn't way above average." "When I'm at a normal school, I'm always one of the cleverest," James said. "But I'm just kind of ordinary here." "So anyway," Amy said, "when you arrived at CHERUB a few months after your mum died, it was natural that you formed a strong attachment to any girl who played a big part in your life. Like you, because you were teaching me to swim." Amy nodded. "And Kerry, because she was your partner in basic training. Have you asked her out yet?" "God, don't you start," James moaned. "It's bad enough with Kyle always going on about it. But you and Kerry are always so sweet together. I love the way you two pick at one another like some old married couple." James didn't want to hear it. He slipped off the side of the pool and began swimming towards the deep end. The dossier that arrived from MI5 on the Lambiek cartel ran to over 300 pages, though a lot of it was photos and maps. James and Amy spent Tuesday morning in one of the mission preparation rooms, skimming through the chapters and marking the most relevant stuff with highlighter pens. James could take the books on computer hacking back to Luton for study, but the Lambiek dossier wasn't allowed off campus. After they'd worked through the dossier, Amy got 5 laptop PCs out of a storage room and lined them up on a desk. She set an ancient wind-up timing clock to count down from 15 minutes. "Each one of these PCs has a list of stolen credit card numbers hidden on the hard drive," Amy explained. "You've got to hack each one inside the time limit without leaving any footprints behind." "Which one first?" James asked. "Doesn't matter," Amy said, leaning over and starting the timer. "Go." James had a mini heart attack before grabbing a laptop, flipping up the screen and tapping a couple of keys. "What do I do?" he said to himself, drumming his hands on the desk in front of him. "Turning it on would be a good start," Amy smirked. "Don't forget to read the bio screen before Windows starts." James read the figures aloud. 256 meg of memory, Windows ME. The hard drive isn't partitioned. If it's ME, it uses a FAT32 file system. So if I press F8 and enter DOS, I'll be able to open any file, even if it's password protected. James hunted around the desk for a floppy disk. He waved it at Amy. This is the disk with the utility on that lists every file on the PC, isn't it?" Amy nodded. "I'm not supposed to be helping you." James looked around the side of the PC for somewhere to slot the floppy disk. "Oh, this bloody thing doesn't have a floppy drive. Is there an external drive for this somewhere?" Amy shook her head. "Well, what do I do?" Amy shrugged and looked at the timer. "You've got 12 minutes left to figure it out." James fiddled hopelessly with the laptop for another 3 minutes. He could happily have chucked the clicking timer out the window. 9 minutes left. "Oh, tell us, Amy," James begged. "I'm totally stuck. How can I get this floppy running?" "The computer has a network interface on the back," Amy said. "You could wire it up to one of the other laptops that has a floppy drive. Then you could go into the network properties on the second laptop and change it to a networkable floppy drive. Then the floppy drive on the second PC will work as if it's attached to the first one." "Oh, I'm never going to get all that done in 9 minutes," James gasped. "You might if you hurried. But why not try something much simpler?" "Like what?" James asked. What's the first thing I taught you about computer hacking? The first golden rule. The weakest link is the human link, James said. Amy nodded. You're trying to find a backdoor into the operating system before you've tried the front door. Never assume the information you're looking for is encrypted or hidden. For all you know, you can open the document you want just by clicking on it. You're telling me I've just wasted 6 minutes? Nearer to 7 now, Amy said, smirking. James switched off the computer and started from scratch. The computer only had a few programs installed, and the documents were all in one folder. James opened up the list and spotted one called Card Numbers. He double-clicked the mouse to open the file. A single line of text popped up on the screen. You didn't think it was going to be that easy, did you? James was in too much of a state to see the funny side. He looked at the long list of documents on the screen in front of him. There wasn't time to open every one, but James realised he was looking for a list of numbers, which meant the file would be fairly small. He changed the view, so the computer showed him the size and format of each file. He skipped down the list, opening any text file that looked likely to be the list of numbers. 3 minutes left, Amy said. Better get your skates on, cowboy. James started opening up files as fast as he could. A few demanded a password before they'd open. James dragged these into a separate folder. When he ran out of documents that didn't need a password, he decided to try and guess the password of the encrypted ones. A password can be any combination of letters and numbers, but James knew the second golden rule of computer hacking. Over 75% of passwords are easily guessed. He started working down the list of the most commonly used passwords that Amy had made him memorize the day before. Things like password, open, and security. After these failed, James tried to find personal details about the man who owned the laptop. He remembered that one of the documents he'd opened had been a letter to a school. He clicked on the file and skimmed through it. It was signed off by a man called Julian Stipe and mentioned the names of his 3 children. James tried the name Julian in the password box, then Stipe, then Julian Stipe with and without a space in between. 90 seconds, Amy said. He started trying the names of Mr. Stipe's kids and hit the jackpot when he typed Jennifer. The document opened, only it wasn't the credit card numbers. The other protected documents opened with the same password, and James got a massive rush when a sheet of 16-digit credit card numbers popped up on screen. Bingo! James shouted. 15 seconds, Amy said. I've got them, James said. What do you want about? Time's up, Amy said. Better luck next time. But I got them, James said tetchily. I know, Amy said. But you weren't supposed to leave any traces behind. It was a good idea to move the password-protected documents, but you should have put them all back where they belonged and deleted the new folder you created. Ready for the next one? Oh, my head's spinning, James said. Can't I have a 5-minute break? Amy gave him an evil grin. You don't deserve a break after that sorry performance. She tapped the reset button on top of the clock, then flipped up the lever to set it ticking.